Let's get started with the December 2021 DevOps for Defense. First off, huge thanks for everybody coming out. I do want to actually, while we got their logo up on the screen, start by thanking Tech Systems, Jonathan. I know traffic's a bear, but he's brought in some pizzas for us. So please go over and grab a slice, enjoy the some friendship in the meetup. This month, I'm super excited. We've got a talk from Microsoft Azure. Lynn Nguyen is here, just flew in from LA this morning, and we're going to see some really cool stuff. I'll introduce him in a little bit more detail in just a second. But as always, on next, it doesn't want to click. As always, we'll start with our code of conduct. This is an unclassified area, so please no dirty words. Please treat each other with respect and professionalism. Do not talk about your secret sauce. Nobody wants to know it. But do talk about your experiences and what you need, and share with others, help them learn and learn from them. And if you are attending virtually, I do ask you to mute yourself. And the way I had to set up the audio, unfortunately, we are not going to be able to hear questions from you. I apologize, but I'll find a better way to do that in the future. So, still doesn't work. That's annoying. Today is our 4-year anniversary. So it's hard to believe we've been doing the DevOps for Defense meetup for 48 months now. Do a quick search for the room. Still have a special guest that I'm hoping will show up here in just a minute. But my goodness, 4 years, it's been something else. I think I need to stop and thank a couple of people. First and foremost, April. Oh my God. You would be surprised that running a meetup for 4 years takes a lot of time and a kind of embarrassing amount of money sometimes. And so she's really not complained at all as we've gone through this stuff, which is amazing. So huge thanks there. Once again, Tech Systems and Jonathan's providing us so much support along the way as he's brought in food, supported us in multiple activities. So huge thanks to the members of the community who come out and support. And then Rocket Republic, we got to say, these guys, they let us use the space for free. They help us set up, they help us tear down. They've been really great partners as we've gone through this. So huge thanks to those guys. And please, please, please take care of Jeff on the way out. Super great help as we've been going through all this. Let's see, next. And this month, special opportunity. Huge thanks to QTech and Steve, if you want to come up. Steve and QTech have agreed to host a book club for us this month. So here's my copy, Sooner, Safer, Happier by Jonathan Smart. This is actually a really good book. It's focused on leadership characteristics for high-performing teams. If you're interested in that kind of genre, it walks you through a series of anti-patterns and patterns. So how do you do things really, really poorly? And then the counterpoint, how do you fix it? How do you do things well? A lot of great real world examples in there, a ton of stuff to learn from. And so let me introduce Steve. You want to say a few words?
Sure. Thanks, JD. So honestly, I have not read the book, but it's got two things going with it. One is JD recommended it, and he's really good recommendations, right? So I'm going to read it. Second thing is I read the introduction, and it references a lot of books I have read and a lot of material I'm familiar with, going back to anybody remember Edward Demings and TQM? Yeah, okay. A lot of it, all the way forward to Project Unicorn and things like that. So looks like a great book. I can't wait to read it. QTech Aerospace, we're pleased to be a partner with you guys. We're a woman-owned small business here in Huntsville, do a lot of good systems engineering, software engineering, things like that. So if you're interested, hit our website, hit me up or something like that. Otherwise, love to be able to contribute these books. Have fun with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So the way we'll do this, as soon as Lynn's done with this talk, we'll end up breaking out. We'll do some Lynn coffees. We'll have some cake. Very exciting. Anniversary cake. Oh, good. I'm excited about one more thing now, I have to say. And then we'll hand out books. And so if you would like to join our book club and come back next month and talk about your, what you learned, let's say in the first section of the book, please grab one. We will be back the first Thursday of every month, and we would love to talk about your impressions, what you learned, what you liked, what you disliked about that book. Now, we have a really interesting thing. It's been 4 years ago now that 3 years ago, we celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And was anybody here for the 1-year anniversary celebration? Anybody? One, just me, 2 of us. You were here. So, oh, you were here. So we actually had our first big guest speaker, and that was Lou Manglass from Stack Overflow, came into town and did a great talk. Lou, welcome back. If you get a chance, stop by and say hi to Lou. He's driven over from Georgia to join us to celebrate our anniversary again. So it's awesome to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Next. So with that, now it's time to hand things over to Lynn Nguyen. So Lynn's got a really intriguing background. If you're really into this DevOps and you're in the defense world, the things that you hear about Kobayashi Maru, you hear about ATO in a day, you hear about Kessel Run. So Lynn has been part of that. He's lived it. He has actually been part of those teams who have accomplished these amazing things by bringing new ways of thinking and operating and working into a culture and an environment that's not really accustomed to it. His experiences are things that I read about that inspire me to try to do new, interesting things in our domain. So I am super excited to hear Lynn's presentation as we go forward here. And with that, Lynn, let me hand it over to you. And thank you for coming out.
Mic check. All right. Hey, happy 4th anniversary, everyone. DevOps for Defense. Does it work? So a great colleague of mine at Microsoft introduced me to JD, and I'm so thankful to be asked to speak here. When I looked at your mission statement of transitioning from legacy waterfall systems engineering methods to more lean agile, I was really intrigued because that journey is really difficult. And you've had a number of highly esteemed speakers at your events in the past, and to be invited to come speak with you and meet with you is very much an honor. So thank you. I wanted to speak with you today about the things that you have read about across all the books: Lean Enterprise, Lean Agile, Deliver It, Accelerate, all those great books that you've read. And I wanted to talk about practical methods to introducing those concepts at work and actually living them and making them a reality. Sure. Gotcha. So who the heck am I, right? Spencer and Benny asked me, Lynn, what do you do for a living? And asking a middle-aged man what they do for a living is like asking another person their age. It's like, I love you, brother, but it's an existential question that I ask myself every single day when I wake up. But I would be remiss not to mention my sponsor, Microsoft. I work for Microsoft Azure. What is my title? The longer your title is, the less technical you get. So here's my title: Microsoft Azure Application Innovation Specialist. And I think there's a director part in there, but I leave that out. So the mission statement at Microsoft, and particularly within Azure, is that we want to empower you, the individual, and you as an organization, as a team, to do more every day. So think of that as the kind of like the underlying pin basis, the foundation of what we're going to talk about today. How can you do more with all the resources given to you? All right. So let's go about like why am I here? As I mentioned, you've read and you've listened to a lot of speakers who are arguably the leading thought leaders of this industry in DevOps. So what did I do? So think of this as an origin story. My background, I used to be a software developer way back when, in the early days of the web. I became a systems engineer, systems integrator, and then I jumped shipped over to the commercial industry to do sales engineering. And then now I'm just a salesperson. So I cover the gamut. But way back during the early days of DevOps or DevSecOps, which let's use that term interchangeably for the sake of our conversation. I participated in a small group and we wrote the DevOps ConOps for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. And at that point, it was typical acquisitions were still the waterfall methodologies of generating RFPs, systems, architectures, requirements, and acquisitions and so forth. Then you develop a system, you deliver it. By the time things were delivered, either they're out of OBE or they're out of date, or they didn't necessarily meet the user requirements. And so really that's kind of like the advent of lean, agile, lean enterprise practices within the IC. So we wrote that ConOps, and a lot of it was also the timing of the commercial cloud services, C2S contract, if you remember that. So there was a lot of migrations to the cloud. And back in 2015, early 2016, a lot of the migrations were primarily lift and shift, right? How do you do things in the data center today? Let's procure VMs and move the code straight over. So when you look at DevOps, the whole purpose of, well, the core purpose of DevOps is to, one of the things is how do I quickly get my application into production? So what's my path to production? If you look at that value stream, the problem that we always hit with lift and shift was always, hey, I can relatively develop software relatively quickly and secure it. But when it comes to that last mile problem, it was always get a VM, right? And as a developer, I never wanted to touch VMs. I just wanted to work on the coding portion. And so at that point, we were looking at methods to run applications quickly in the cloud via platforms as a service. All right. And so with that, I joined a company that set up platforms, and I helped NGA set up their platform application team to accept and to run modern cloud native applications. And so from there, we moved on to look at the dev portion and the DevSec portion of DevOps to establish software factories. And so now I go back to the DoD and IC and civilian territories to preach about innovation in the application development space. All right. So let's talk about, as I mentioned, let's talk about an origin story. You've heard of, as JD mentioned, Kessel Run and the ATO in a day concepts and Kobayashi Maru and all these software factories that are popping up across the DoD, like the DoD software chief software officer is trying to promote across the industry, like all really good practices. And you hear about these thought leaders. There are many individuals and many things that contributed to the success of those software factories and those software ventures. And so the story that I'm going to share with you is just one of the angles that led up to that successes, because they all built upon each other. JD also asked me to talk about cloud perspectives. And let's ask the question, what is the cloud? What is a cloud? And then from there, let's talk about the flow of continuous learning, right? Continuous growth. So I will offer you gratis learning resources as you accelerate 1/4. All right, so 3 sections. Let's go over here. So little idea. Who knows where this is? San Francisco, Powell and Sutter. Sadly, because of the pandemic, my favorite diner is no longer in existence. But this was back in around fall of 2016. A friend of mine who was working with the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, DIUX, based out of the Silicon Valley area. They were writing an application to solve a problem called, as you know, air tanker refueling problem, right? Who's heard of Jigsaw out of Kessel Run? So Jigsaw, before Jigsaw, tanker refuel planners were doing things on whiteboards and magnets and Excel spreadsheets. And so a friend of mine and his product group developed an application to automate that and help make an 8-hour process into a 1-hour process and reduce the manpower to create the application. The problem was that last mile. Where were they going to run it? Were they going to set up a set of VMs somewhere in the cloud and run it? Well, the problem was the users were based over in Qatar, in Al Udeid Air Force Base. So it just so happened that he had an application that was cloud native. And I had just finished working with the NGA team to set up platforms as a service on multiple security domains. And so the little idea there was, hey, let me broker a relationship between you, Air Force, DIUX, and NGA, right? How about let's run your app in our test environment. All you need is an SSP, and I'll submit you in to get in right away. All right. So there you see the union, if you will, of an application that is ready to go but didn't have a landing place. I had a landing place to run it. And then the third portion was, in order to get it up and running, you needed an IATT, right? So when we got the accreditation for the platform itself, as you all know, who has worked with FISMA security controls, NIST 800-53, Rev 4, triple moderate CIA, right? You're talking 1,167 security controls, notwithstanding the overlays. All right. Well, because platforms as a service was new at that time, there wasn't, shall we call, security requirements guidelines or security implementation guidelines, right? There was none of that because it was all new technology. So we had to define or redefine how those security controls were implemented via the platform. And when we looked at those hundreds of security controls, we realized that, hey, wait a minute, a lot of these security controls only apply to either the physical infrastructure or the virtual infrastructure. They apply to the platform, and some of them apply to the applications itself. So if that's the case, why would you make an application product team be responsible for the full stack of security controls? Why not do something called security controls inheritance so that as you run multiple applications, they could all accept the baseline set of security controls, thereby making the security controls to be responsible for by the applications a much smaller set. So as the application product team, if you have a smaller system security plan, SSP, hopefully the DAO, the designated authorizing official, and the SCAR, the security controls assessment rep, can evaluate your SSP much quicker and grant it an IATT and ATO, right? So that was the theory. All right, so as you read about in all our books, we're always reading theories, but how does it work? So here we are sitting late in a diner. My friend and I were like talking about how to do this. I went home that weekend and wrote up the SSP for the application. We submitted on a Monday and sat on someone's desk for a couple of weeks. And then it was approved. Then it was deployed. The deployment process took a few minutes, as you know, just running with past services. And the URI was granted over to the team that was doing refueling missions as a test environment, right? Hey, here's the new application that you asked for with your design input. Let's get your feedback on how this works. All right. So fast forward maybe 2 weeks, the platform operations team reached out to me and said, hey, Lynn, we're noticing that your application, the application that we're running here in the test environment, the utilization rate is constantly, the time of day, it's high use at a certain point in time. Can you tell us what's going on? Like, do you have open test windows? So we contacted the user base and they were like, guys, thanks for the application. We've been running operations on this for the last 2 weeks. It works great. I think there's a statute of limitations, so we can't be arrested for running production in the test environment. But needless to say, we demonstrated at a small scale, what was it like to quickly develop an application, how to quickly accredit the application and get it into operations, right? And so those are the underpinnings of ATO in a day. We didn't call it ATO. We didn't even know what we were doing. It was just an idea, right? So as we got feedback from the applications team, the product team reiterated their product and redeployed quickly. And that is the evolution or the cycle of DevSecOps, right? And eventually Kessel Run was born out of that. Kessel Run was launched to develop additional applications in addition to Jigsaw. We use that model to establish Kobayashi Maru. So if you've heard of Kobayashi Maru in Section 31, they have a plethora of applications that are running for a CSPOC at Vandenberg Air Force Base and so forth. Right? That's all open source information, by the way. All right. And so this is just a glimpse, and that was an early image of, well, the old legacy process was the whiteboard, as I mentioned. They went into the basic UI of doing tanker planning, and then they advanced on that to do AI and traveling salesperson algorithms to optimize fuel routes, because there are different types of fuel tankers and different aircrafts that require, and not all the booms were compatible with the various vehicles. So they use those algorithms to optimize the plan. So fast forward today, apparently I just found out that NATO even just bought the application that was developed by the same crew. So it's just tremendous success. And it just goes to prove that success is not something that was, we didn't say in that diner, hey, you know what we should do? We should do DevSecOps and like just throw out a whole tool chain, a whole process and organization. We just said, hey, can we just do this one simple thing? That one simple thing led to other things. Those other things became successful. And as I always say to my partners, my colleagues, success breeds success. So let's not try to boil the ocean, but let's just try to do something, right? Pick something and learn from it if it doesn't work. People will say in text nowadays, failure is okay. We didn't fail, we just experimented and we found things that worked, things that didn't work, and we iterated on the things that did work. All right. What is this? You all know this, right? And I'm not going through all the phases. But what really is the core purpose of doing what we are gathered to talk about, DevSecOps, right? It's to quickly develop software, securely run it, and then do it all over again very quickly, right? And it actually can apply to a lot of different things. So let's talk about some of the practical aspects. Now, you will have access to these charts. I'm not going to go over this eye chart that I'm going to give you, but what are the things that typically it involves, right? Well, who are the actors involved in DevSecOps? There's the development or the product teams. There's the security teams that are responsible for securing the application up front and maintaining security throughout operations, right? They're taking on the risk of the RMF. And then we have platform operators. Typically, we've been referred to as IT operations. IT operations, same thing, roughly, albeit that here the IT operations team is working with the cloud native services. So what are some of the elements that really helped us to become successful as we go about from software factory to different software factories and help stand them up from literally from nothing, from scratch? So, you know, I was talking with Ms. Tanya today, and the term came up of product teams. And I'm so refreshed to hear that, because in the systems engineering days, what were we all called? Project management teams, right? And in modern practices, as you know, we're called product teams because products don't end. We don't know what we don't know. So you start out with something and you experiment with it and you grow it. So practices of using lean, agile product management are part and parcel to this philosophy. And I think Lean Enterprise by Jez Humble is a fantastic text on that topic. What about the security team? Security, I don't really know what security does, but no. The security ISOs, like how can they contribute, right? The old process, no, I shouldn't say old, but the former legacy processes are typically, give me your SSP and I'll evaluate it when the system is done, and then make a decision to accept it or not, right? And then we've all heard the term, the trend has been going security shift left. We've all heard that term. But exactly what does that mean? And how does, as a security officer, how would I impact the team, right? How do I reduce this value stream of getting an application or system into production? Well, as a security officer, what I can do is I can specify the security controls that developers should be accountable for early on. And I should specify the threshold by which I will accept the risk for security, for applications going through the various test processes. So what are the security controls? And then potentially maybe how developers and application product teams can test for security. Should I test for application vulnerabilities, dependency checks, middleware checks? Should the development team be responsible for the operating system and patching? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that's part of the platform operators, right? And so to summarize there, security engineers can specify security controls up front and then just use tools like, I'm a big fan of a tool called SD Element, which translate NIST 853 security controls for the developer and puts it into the backlog for security developers to verify. And then what about the platform operator during this whole mix? Well, platform operators are going to be operating the application. So thereby they should participate in the development process to understand what are all the resources the application stack needs, right? What type of application is it? Is it a two-tier application? Is it a microservice-based application? What services does it need for, say, load balancing, ingress, security, identity management, databases, and other cloud native services, right? So the operations team is there to provide those resources so that the development team can call upon them quickly without having to stand it up themselves. So they're provision resources. And as we look on to the back half of deploying the applications, what does that look like for the product teams? Well, when you're deploying applications, when we're talking about the test and dev environments, well, typically the product team, the developers will be doing the development, the deployment of said applications. However, the IT operations platform or operations team should be hand in hand with the developers so that both sides of the coin, both sides of the team knows how the application was developed, what resources it needs, how it's developed, and then how to operate the application. What should we be looking at? What kind of signals should we be looking at for application and system performance? And obviously the role here for the system security officer is to grant IATT or ATO to the application based on wherever it's going, whether it's a test environment or production environment. But the risk should be minimal because the security officer has already understood that the application has already been tested up front, and it's going to land on a platform as a service that has already been accredited, right? And with regards to going into production itself, the platform operations team is typically the ones who only have the keys to deploy apps to production, but the development, the product teams, and the operations team should hand in hand work together to monitor the application. So use full stack APM tools, application performance monitoring tools, to monitor the performance of the application, the performance of the middleware, the platform, and the infrastructure itself, the virtual machines, and the networks. Have you all read Site Reliability Engineering? And I won't say by my competitor company, Google. The 4 golden signals: latency, memory, CPU, and number of errors should be the basic minimum requirements that we look at with regards to the applications. But as when we look at using cloud resources to run our applications, as applications become less monolithic and more tiered, or shall I say more service-based, so we look at microservices, then we look at systems to do event tracing, right? So we could see where application instances, containers are running, which specific virtual machine or platform it's running on, which network, and which even data center it's running on for availability zone. And so if you look at the distributed tracing, that's another method for looking at optimizing your service-based applications. All right. So what we just covered here was kind of like practical approaches that we learned when we were experimenting with DevSecOps. And these are the principles by which we take as we help to establish modern software factories, right? Starting with software factories, a lot of us focus on, myself included, we focus on the tooling. What is the CI/CD tooling? Is it, what Git do you want to use? What CI tool? What code? What IDE you want to use? Integrated development environment. What are the test tools? SonarQube, Nexus, Nessus, static code analyzer, and so forth. And so we focus on the tooling. But if you had all the tooling on day one put in place, does that make a successful team? Absolutely not, right? And that's what really the crux is to start small, do something, do what works, learn from it, and then grow from there and expand your tool sets. There's really no need for one big bang, if you will, all together, just put everything else together at once. And really, that's the summary with regards to the proven methods. I'd be happy to talk about more of them with you offline. Reach out to me during email or whatever. We could have Zoom calls to go over these processes on how to do whatever portion of the DevSecOps phases that you want to implement. So I'm going to shift gears into topic 2. Can I do that? All right. Who are these guys? I'll buy you a beer if you know who. Well, obviously the first one is you already know is Naughty by Nature. Backstreet Boys is the second one. I'm going to date myself. I didn't really listen to them, but the point there is, let's ask the question, well, what is the cloud? Is it one or the other? Is it other people's property? Is it, hey, the cloud, I run my own data center here in my physical on-prem, is using the cloud merely using someone else's data center that's managed by other people, right? So am I losing my job to manage this and then just giving it to someone else? Is it that definition? Or is it a definition of a quiet revolution or a quiet set of innovation, if you look at it quietly, of very rapidly developing cloud services, new application frameworks, new application components that contributed to micro-based, cloud native-based applications that are evolving very quickly through organizations like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, as they incubate new things. So standard process like you hear today, like pub-sub mechanisms like Kafka, or streaming like Databricks, Confluent Databricks, so forth. Like, where did these services come from? They came from incubation projects that became mainstream, right? And these are now becoming the linchpins, the components, puzzle pieces for modern applications as you see them running today, running in the clouds throughout the world, right? So how do we, is that how you define the cloud? Well, let's see. In the lens of our good friend Jez Humble's Lean Enterprise book. So you've seen this graph. Ubiquity of technology. This is a lifecycle innovation that applies generally to a lot of innovations. You see the ubiquity of the application versus time. And so when a new incubating technology comes out, as you know, there's low adoption, but the competitive advantage is high because you're doing something new that no one else arguably is doing. You can capture that. You can capture that competitive advantage. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. And at some point, innovation becomes an inflection point. It becomes, how's this now? All right. And at some point, the innovation cycle takes an inflection and then it becomes a commodity, right? When it becomes a commodity, the race is there is based on availability, and even just something as simple as pricing, right? A VM is a VM. Are you really going to differentiate yourself in that front? All right. So if you look at this from as a basis for defining what the cloud is, where do those definitions fall? So one can argue that data centers, as we classically have known them, virtual networks, databases, networks, really fall kind of potentially maybe in the commodity territory, right? They're well understood processes. And that the new services for application development fall within that new lower part, right? They're not widely adopted, but you can take a lot of competitive advantage by adopting them, right? However, the beautiful thing is a lot of clouds, Azure included, there is tremendous innovation even with what we used to think, or what we think is today as commodity, right? So innovations not only in the virtual machine types towards graphics processing units, but also innovation in terms of form factor of the data centers itself. So now we have, obviously you've seen, if you've lived in or been to Ashburn, Virginia, which is like the #5 place to live in America, according to Money Magazine, because it's only data centers and the roads are well paved. And that's where I lived. That's where I live now. All the way form factors to rockable backpacks, right? That have cloud computing resources. So tremendous innovations. Innovations in satellite grounds, mission ground stations as a service, right? Azure Orbital is something that's the leading into that front. And so it's not necessarily a question of, is it one or the other, but it's both. And it's both because it matters to whoever and whatever you want to do, whatever your need is, you focus on that particular area. And so here's a great colleague of mine that I learned a lot from my pivotal days, Cornelia Davis. Her definition is actually focusing on that latter definition, right? It's not so much as like where you run your applications, which is kind of true. Like as you use your mobile applications today, are you saying like, I wish it ran in this data center rather than that? Like probably not. But rather, how did you develop that application to meet your needs? And what are the innovations to the digital experiences that your applications, your cloud native applications are offering me? Right. And so she focuses on the latter, but I would say that it's both. And so this is washed out, but you can go to the CNCF Landscape and you can see the thousands of modern software frameworks and technologies that span all the things that you need to do to run an application. As I mentioned earlier, identity access management, networking, pub/sub mechanisms, databases, streaming services, IoT, AI, ML, all those services, right? Each of those fields, you can see tremendous growth. If we're running in the local data center and only in the local data center, how would it be possible for us to learn all of these technologies, right? If they're applicable to our mission space? It's almost insurmountable, right? You'd have to have a pretty large budget. It's kind of like earning 6 levels of, 5 nines of availability. Well, that's very expensive to do. It's easier to say. And as you know, you've probably heard of something that I've just recently read about, the Great Resignation. Have you heard about that? Which means we, the workers, now have the power, right? Which means we can literally go anywhere. You learn new technologies, and there's free-flowing individuals from different companies to different companies. But the point there is, the point there is, can you deploy these open source technologies yourself to the cloud, to your own data centers? Yes, absolutely. But it would take a little bit of time, and you would have to learn all those resources yourself. And the value of these tools, the value is not learning to deploy it and operate it. The value is using it, right? And so why not leverage cloud provider services? And this is just a high-level chart of showing Azure services as they range across all the managed services, right? So if you're learning how to, let's say, what is the classic problem in our industry? One of the classic problems has been siloed systems, the inability to share data, right? And even within the confines of the same, I was going to say business space, but let's just say like defense space or intelligence space, right? We're all, let's just say we all have need to know and so forth, systems across systems, but those systems are isolated because they all have their own data stores. And in order to share data, well, you would have to size the systems according to interface control documents so that you can accept read calls from other systems. Well, modern systems don't do that. Modern systems use things like pub/sub mechanisms. Let's say if my system X is generating some type of data, it can write to a Kafka message topic, and then based on RBAC controls, to be read asynchronously by whatever system that is allowed to read it, right? And that's one mechanism to read it, right? And so now these are generally accepted cloud native practices and architecture principles that you can apply. So how do you use Kafka? Well, instead of deploying it for yourself, go to a cloud, Azure, for example, and start using the Azure Kafka service, right? And if you really want to get spicy, another problem that we have recently, actually not recent, is authoritative data, right? When we create data and we share it, how do you know that the ontology, the heritage, the lineage of that data is true? How do you know it's truth, right? Well, what is the financial industry going through today? The revolution towards blockchain technology. So let's get spicy. Why don't you all apply blockchain ledger technology to problems within our defense space, right? All right. And so that's a definition of the cloud. Hopefully that was clear. It's both. It's not only the physical data centers that are providing the commodity resources, but those commodity resources are also undergoing tremendous innovation unto themselves, as well as what's going on those boxes, right, are the open source software that's being powered by open source community. There was a question with regards to security of the cloud. Azure, for instance, has to go through compliance for not only US government, but also the financial industry and the healthcare industry and other foreign governments for foreign-based data centers, right? So any data center that pops up for use in the DoD and IC undergoes the same amount of scrutiny, if not more, than our local on-prem services. So just throwing this out in terms of security. However, just because you operate in the cloud, does that mean that your systems are safe? As a cloud practitioner, we are all still responsible for security, right? However, the cloud provides you all the security services so that we can ensure the safety and welfare of our systems and applications, right? Things that, for example, communications routing, right? Network security groups, IDAM, and so forth, right? Encryption of data, all those aspects as practitioners, that's our responsibility to build into our applications and systems. All right. And third, but not last, I do come bearing gifts. Thank you for the swag, JD. But you all have free access to Azure, right? Log on to this link, Azure for Students. You have a number of hours, don't quote me, I think it's 120 hours. You have access to the abundance of like hundreds of different services that are on there. So get on there and experiment with it, all right? So one is now you have free access to Azure portal, right? And pick your favorite region. But when you're on there, what are you gonna do? Well, the next one is there are learning paths. So whatever your role is, application developer, learning how to do cloud native applications, cloud security, how to run graphics processing, whatever your discipline is, there are various learning paths that are outlined in that second link. And it shows you different paths to get new skills and that lead to certifications in Azure, right? And then thirdly I mentioned the word cloud native, and that's just a buzzword, but what does that mean, right? Well, let's look at cloud native architectures. Let's look at application design patterns that are really meant to use all these services. Services like if I want to do, say, event-based applications, right? Triggered by some event, do some processing, write to pub sub mechanism, and then trigger some other extending function, right? And so cloud native applications are applications that are really meant to run in distributed data centers, distributed platforms, and that are agnostic, that are resilient, and can grow and shrink upon demand, and that are secure. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me tonight. I'd love to speak with each of you and learn about what you do. But here's the offer, experiment and learn, right? As JD and this DevOps crew has always been pontificating and sharing is the fact of we all continue to learn. So use these free resources at hand. You probably heard me already say, do what works, right? Pick something. You don't need to engineer to death before you start. Just pick something and do it, learn it. And it's just like flowing the web, right? One thing will lead to another. And they're all related to each other, right? So build up that core expertise. With regards to team culture, I have a wonderful colleague at Microsoft who talks about how to build team cultures, team dynamics as it relates to DevSecOps. I would just say, build your own, because it's not cookie cutter, right? We're all sentient beings, we're all different. Let's do what works within us, not only from a tools perspective, but from a process, right? And organizational culture. And I love the mantra for this, this meetup is to share and learn from others. So if you like, I can offer up other speakers that talk about point technologies. You all should also, as you experiment, right, and learn, you be the next speaker and show what you did in the cloud, right? Demonstrate an event-based application, right? Show functions that are triggered by something. So experiment, learn, iterate, have a good time. Happy 4th anniversary and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Lynn. So that last bit Lynn was talking about, I want to embarrass somebody out here. He doesn't know this is happening, which makes it more fun. So we we're working with a whole bunch of different solutions, and I won't call you out by name because I don't want to embarrass you that bad, but we have this really smart, young engineer who's helping understand elements of cloud, right? What does cloud mean for us in our environment? And Lynn's story about, the ATO in a day and how that chained its way forward into the tanker program, and what happened with, how that evolved into what is really the poster child program that the Air Force and Nick Shalon had held up as the poster child, is such a cool thing because it just starts with that first small step. So this engineer who I have to connect with you before he runs out, we're working through some stuff, and I'm like, have you logged into the cloud and actually done it yourself yet? No, not yet. Okay, next week, have you logged into the cloud and done it for yourself yet? No, not yet. Well, like Lynn said, it's free. The resources are out there. It doesn't take long. So finally, a couple of weeks later, have you logged into the cloud and done it for yourself yet? Yes, I have. It was ridiculously easy. So the opportunity to go out there and put your hands on stuff and actually learn, to take kind of that responsibility for your own professional development is right there at your fingertips. So I just want to encourage everybody, don't overlook that opportunity, because you can get so much value out of it. And in a matter of hours, some of the courses that Lynn pointed you to there, you can literally become the expert in your team in a weekend by just walking through that stuff. It's so cool. I personally went out and said, what is this serverless stuff? I keep seeing people talk about it. I keep seeing conference presentations on it. So what did I do? Step one, the most common one people talk about is Lambda. I have a free account. I can get free services. Go figure it out. I followed the tutorials. I did it myself. I learned about it. Great first step. Next step, go to Azure. Do the same thing with Azure Functions. Make sure that you have that little bit of diversity. You can be the expert in your team with almost no investment on your own part. And so it's really great way to, number one, invest in yourself. But number two, really take things to the next step for your team. Anyway, we're going to wrap up. First off, thank you guys so much for coming out and helping us celebrate 4 years. It's amazing to see, such a great group of people come together. I do want to invite everybody to come up, and if you're interested in joining the book club, say hi to Steve, grab a book. We did put library cards in the book, so we want to encourage you, put your name in the book, read it, participate in our book club, and then give it to someone who you think can benefit from it. Carry that around. Also come up, we've got some lean coffee tables set up. If you've never done a lean coffee, it's so much fun. And on the screen, you see how it works. So the topic that I think fits well with what Lynn just walked us through is, how can cloud change your value stream? Think about some of the things that are out there. How does that apply to you? What are the questions you have? What are the ideas you'd like to explore with people? I think it'd be a really neat session. And then finally, there are tons of resources out there. I want to encourage you to kind of take control of your own learning, your own path. Some outstanding books out there with Sooner, Safer, Happier, newly added to the list. It's a really good book. I have read it cover to cover. I really, really enjoyed it. I'll also say Jonathan Smart, amazingly smart gentleman. Given his name, I guess it's expected. But really smart gentleman, incredible speaker. Go out, look in YouTube. He has a quote unquote training session called You Can Become a Certified Really Agile Practitioner. Get your CRAP certificate. It's amazing. It's like 5-minute presentation, and you'll laugh, but you'll learn. I love that stuff. So with that, book club, lean coffee, and we will be opening up the cake. There's pizza in the back. Please, everybody, help yourself and enjoy your evening. Look forward to seeing you as we socialize.